There were two Shahs, not one. Okay, my talk is going to be brief because of the time, and also I want to fit in just a short report of a meeting that we had yesterday. Anyway, just getting on with the politics. Um, the most important, the most prominent news item, as far as I was concerned, was the European panic over the United States switching off the satellites, ending military supplies to Ukraine, and the coming together of what's called the coalition of the willing. My understanding is that something like 20 countries are involved. It's a moving number because we've been told that Australia is amongst the European powers that are talking about doing something vis-a-vis Ukraine. Either way, we've got Britain involved as a European power. Um, and so these countries, some of them are promising troops, boots on the ground. What there is also a general sort of consensus around is that what is euphemistically called defense spending will increase. And we've had the figure plucked out of a hat. 800 billion euros is the budget. And certainly the message from Donald Trump is pretty blunt, pretty clear. And that is, if you don't pay, we won't defend you. We also have talk of a following summit to put sort of the details in. That's going to be on March the 20th, 21st. And we're also getting from Europe and Ukraine this rather pathetic message: no negotiations without Ukraine, or no negotiations without Europe. So we do have Zelensky heading off to Saudi Arabia. We do have Trump heading off to Saudi Arabia. But the reality is that what's going on is negotiations between the United States and Russia, and Europe and Ukraine might be the subject of those negotiations, but they're certainly not considered equal partners. That what is in the offing is some sort of deal between the United States and Russia. Having said that, I don't think that we should fall for the line that peace is just about to break out, that it's all over bar the shouting and the extra push here and the extra shove there on the front line, because it takes two, doesn't it? So we've got a rough idea what Trump is offering, and that is to sort of carve up Ukraine. 20% goes to Russia. What do they get in return? That hasn't been dealt with. We've heard speculation, which I'm extremely skeptical of myself, of some attempt to cleave Russia away from China. If you were Putin, would you fall into the arms of Donald? Um, um, I wouldn't. How much longer is Donald going to be around? Um, is America a reliable partner in this? And also, in that sense, if Russia doesn't do a deal or the deal that Trump wants, we also have the big stick, and we have Trump talking about, not only continuing the war, but upping the war. So, what's going on at the moment, at least in my mind, is very confusing. I'm not clear. And I actually think that the situation is simply not clear because there's a whole number of different possibilities depending on what the various actors do. But just illustrating Europe's position, we had Kaja Kallas. She's the former Estonian Prime Minister. She's now the sort of number two in the European Union. She traveled all the way to Washington to see members of the administration, not least Rubio, and was rudely snubbed. Rubio said, well, I've got another appointment. And so she went all the way to Washington only to be turned down. She wasn't told that before she, traveled all the way over the Atlantic. So this is a deliberate snub by the Trump administration, basically saying to Europe, well, you can pay, but you ain't going to be consulted in any equal fashion. So, what's in prospect? You could argue that what's in prospect is a European backed proxy war. But again, I think myself, I would be very skeptical on that, not least because of the argument between Macron and Starmer. So Starmer, his line appears to be that what we Europeans do is up our arms expenditure, and to please Donald over there in Washington, what we do is use this money to buy mainly American arms. And my impression is that Germany, but in particular France, is in despair over that what they want is, here's an opportunity to build up European arms industry. Here's a chance to actually stimulate industrial production in a stagnating Europe. And what we have is Keir Starmer wanting to appease Trump by buying mainly American arms. Now, it's quite possible, and I've heard this, and I'm not dismissing it by any stretch of the imagination. I take it seriously, that one of the ideas entertained by the Trump administration is, first of all, to get Europe to buy more arms from America. Who knows whether there will be a ceasefire or a deal with Russia? The two, remember, are different. So maybe they go just for a ceasefire. You freeze the front line, no more fighting. You have an armed standoff. Meanwhile, you have European troops stationed perhaps on the front line, perhaps in Ukraine, perhaps on the border of Ukraine. Nevertheless, a relatively large force of European soldiers locked in to this frozen conflict. Meanwhile, as has been pre-planned in Washington, the Trump administration gets on with its real target, which isn't the overthrow of the Putin FSB regime in Moscow, but actually triggering some sort of armed conflict with China over Formosa, over Taiwan. Maybe that war spreads. Either way, that's the only serious challenger to US hegemony. It's certainly not Putin. It's certainly not Russia. That is a distinct possibility. So that in terms of Europe, it's radically subordinated to the United States. And in effect, what it's doing is paying tribute to a United States which is determined to fight some sort of war with China. And just on the United States, there is talk, and I just think it's just misplaced myself, of the Donald Trump administration being isolationist, the Donald Trump administration not being interested in the rest of the world. I just think that that is untrue. In my view, what we have is the assertion of US hegemony, but in a different way compared with the post 1945 world. That seems to me to be a more realistic assessment of what is going on, as opposed to the United States is turning in on itself, as we saw with the US after World War One. I don't see that being rerun. Okay, so let's just turn to Britain. Just like the rest of Europe, it's faced with an unenviable choice of guns or butter. The choice is of guns. And not only have you seen the overseas aid budget sacrificed on the altar of guns, and Annalisa Dobb resigns. I mean, given already that budget in large measure was going to pay for asylum seekers, what sort of a minister was she anyway? But basically, her budget has been taken away. It all goes on guns, and inevitably, given what they're pledging in terms of GDP, more must go. Exactly what, I don't know, but it will be from the welfare budget. So that means the NHS, that means PIP in terms of disabled people. And I would guess myself, speaking as an old age pensioner, it also means perhaps breaking the link between pensions and inflation, pensions and the average wage. Whatever, something more must be sacrificed. And I don't think we should allow the social imperialists, John McDonnell, the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, Alliance for Workers' Liberty, anti-capitalist resistance, to get away with the pretense that this is nothing to do with their campaigning to back plucky little Ukraine against the Russian monster. They've prepared the ideological ground for this just as much as the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Sun, and all the rest of it. So I'm sure they will object when we have welfare cuts, but the reality is that they ought to take responsibility for it. And just to illustrate, which was, I mean, I don't know how accurate this figure is. I haven't looked it up in terms of source, but just to give you an idea of how things stand at the present, we're told, and it's no doubt correct, that if you take Europe together and you compare it with the United States, Europe taken as a whole has given more military aid in terms of euros, dollars, pounds, depending on how you count it, than the United States. But here's a figure that if we look at what EU powers have given, in terms of where it's sourced, it's only 22% from Europe. That gives you an idea of the relative strengths of the European arms industry compared with the US arms industry. My guess is, I haven't gone and looked at the figures, but my guess is an awful lot of that will be accounted for by American planes, specifically F-16s. They're not the most expensive, but they will be pretty expensive bits of kit. Either way, I've already said that Macron wants to build up the European arms industry. Of course, Starmer wants to build up the British arms industry, but you get an idea of what we're really talking about. It's really US. It's the US that's been benefiting from this Ukraine war, including when it comes to European supplies. Because if we're talking about F-16s, for example, for every hour that they're in the air over Ukraine. They have to have 15 hours of maintenance on the ground to keep them, combat ready, to get them back in the air. And that means a constant supply of not only US munitions and missiles, but spare parts. That needs to be understood. Anyway, one more point in terms of the political report. The split in Reform UK is worthwhile mentioning. I've only heard of 3 of the 5 Reform UK MPs. I've now heard of a 4th, and that's Robert Lowe. He's the one that's been expelled. He's the one that's had the Westminster, the Palace of Westminster authorities called on him. The police are investigating him. But what we've got here isn't something to do with bad behavior. This is a political split in Reform. And basically, the split is over migrants. Not that we shouldn't bar migrants coming in. They're all agreed on that. So Nigel Farage not only wants to stop the boats, he just wants to stop migrants. But the difference is, if we take Robert Lowe, his slogan is repatriate. And he talks about repatriating not just thousands, not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands. And what's interesting about Lowe, what makes it a split, isn't simply we've got one, MP who's no longer a Reform UK MP. What we've got is a split in the ranks of UK, Reform UK. And it appears that the majority of the rank and file activists definitely support the political line of Robert Lowe, as opposed to Nigel Farage, who doesn't think electors, not the activists in Reform UK, but electors would find the mass expulsion of migrants acceptable. And I can believe that. Why? Because if you take people coming in boats, that's a statistic. If you take my next door neighbor, if you take the person I buy fruit from, if you take people, who are going to your kids' school and picking them up at the end of the day, that's a different question. Expelling people who you know personally, that's much harder. And we've seen instances, certainly in London, and I'm sure there's been others. I know in Glasgow, there's been instances of it. And that's next door neighbors, friends, people coming out in solidarity with people who are being picked up by the migration authorities and stopping them being carted away. And at the moment, of course, this is at a pretty low level. But if Robert Lowe had anything to do with it, this would be mass scale. And why it matters isn't just, I say just, the Reform activists who apparently will have some sort of influence over the organization, which is being transformed from being a private company into a much more conventional political party. I don't know whether it will be along the lines of the Tory party or the Lib Dems or Labour. I don't know what the model is. Either way, one other factor ought to be mentioned here, and that's Elon Musk. I'm reminded of the John Hartfield poster. With Adolf Hitler, I have millions behind me, with the hand coming down with loads of Reichsmarks. Well, that's what Elon Musk has got. He's got millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and he's talked about financing Reform UK under a different leadership. So this is an important split. This shouldn't be seen simply as a spat between 5 or 4 Reform UK MPs and one how should I put it, rotten or wayward apple. I know that breaks down, but you get the point. So this is something of significance. Okay, lastly, and I'm going to finish with this. We've got a full report coming in the paper written by Mike McNair. But this is of our meeting yesterday, our first face-to-face meeting between representatives of the CPGB. That was Mike and myself. We had representatives of the pro-party faction. That was Archie, who's a member of RS21, and Kat, who isn't RS21. This is to say the pro-party faction of the Prometheus editorial board, and the representatives of TAS talking about socialism. That was Nick and Ed. And we had an all-day session starting at 10 o'clock, finishing at 5. And mainly what we concentrated on was TAS's points of agreement. They called it heads of agreement. And I think there were 17 points. We went through all of them, some in more detail than others. A lot we just shrugged our shoulders and said, we agree. But there were areas, I wouldn't say disagreement, but areas of where we clarified. And I think actually saw shifts going on in terms of the discussion. So I myself saw shifts when it came to, not that I would be waving the banner for the dictatorship of the proletariat, but saying that boldly as a point of agreement that members have to be a member of a fused organization, that we disown dictatorship. I would find that very hard, simply because of the numerous statements made by Marx, Engels, but not least in the more modern times by Lenin, and we could go into Trotsky, blah, blah, blah. I also would have a problem with saying that communism is democratic. Why? Because of what I understand by orthodox Marxism. And we can have an argument about what is orthodox Marxism. All I'm saying is I would have a problem with that. And of course, it isn't just about me. It would be about other comrades who ought to be members of a fused organization. We also had, I think, a very useful discussion on the transition period. Not so much what we call it. I would call it socialism. You could call it the dictatorship of the proletariat. You could simply call it the transformation period if you want to. But in my view, at least, we ought to have recognition that we simply don't take over capitalism on day one, and on day two, we abolish wage labor, we abolish money, the middle class, the petty bourgeois sector of the economy disappears, everything's socialized, and everything's so wonderful. Wherever we take power, the whole world comes on side, and everything's over by Christmas, so to speak. That might be the case. We very much hope that will be the case, but I just doubt it. And therefore, how do we approach the middle classes? After all, in Britain, there are something like 5.5 million small enterprises. Now, that goes from employing 0 people to 49 people. But we're also dealing with what you might call the skilled middle classes, lawyers, barristers, people like that, who I would find I'd find myself hard push to describe as proletarians. Anyway, whatever the point is, the working class needs a strategy in relationship to that social strata. And my own view is, and I think we were winning comrades over to that sort of type idea, is that when it comes to force, to the extent that we use force, it's really about the state. We want a peaceful revolution, but we smash the existing state. That's a metaphor. But when it comes to going towards the society of the future, what I'd call full communism, what we're dealing with is a much more evolutionary a path. That would be something I think that we got our point over to the comrades, and I think we saw a movement on that. The last point I just wanted to mention, which is very positive in my view, is that we came to an agreement that this year's Communist University, which will be a week-long school, I can't myself give you dates, but it will be, roughly speaking, at the very end of July into early August. And we're looking at the possibility of a Thursday to Thursday school. Either way, what we've agreed is it won't just be jointly sponsored by the three organizations, it will be jointly organized by the three organizations, in part to facilitate debate and clarification between the three organizations, but also to bring in outside speakers, comrades from different countries, United States, Ireland, Australia, the Netherlands, Germany, etc., etc. And what we're hoping for, it hasn't been decided because we only had representatives of half the Prometheus editorial board, the pro-party faction on the editorial board at the meeting. And what the comrades are going to do is put that proposal to the whole editorial board. And we very much hope that that would be something that they would be wanting to come on board with. And there's also an agreement, just to finish, amongst that half of the editorial board to meet both myself and Nick Rack next month. And that's a positive development. So we want to involve these comrades in debate. We want to involve those comrades in discussion. We think that those discussions are going forward. We know that they're going forward. And our next meeting in 2 weeks' time, that will be on a Sunday morning over Zoom, we'll deal with the question of the CPGB's minimum program. What do we mean by it? How do we implement it, etc. So, Burke, that's me finished. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, Jack. So any questions? Can you, Masters, they can raise their hands. Right, Tina?
Sorry. Yes, thanks for that. I'm just wondering if I'm not sure if I missed it when you just reported back in terms of the fusion process, if there's any progress on the agree, accept that issue, which I think is actually quite an important one, if we insist on the agreement, which I got the impression they do, but they seem to have different stages about what they want to agree with, etc. Yeah, I mean, and in terms of the CPGB draft program, I mean, is there any movement that they might that